Some betrayals happen in the shadows. Others happen right in front of you. Slowly. Quietly. So insidiously that by the time you realize what's happened, it's already too late. I wish I could say this is a story about love. But it's not. It's not a story of hate either. It's a story about loneliness. About what happens when a person is left to drown in it for too long. When pain and isolation twist into something unrecognizable. When the only arms that ever held you through the worst storms become the same ones that pull you into the darkest abyss. I never thought I would tell this story. I never thought I could. But here I am. And if you're listening, you need to understand, this isn't easy. This isn't something I'm proud of. It's something I live with every single day. And maybe you'll judge me. Maybe you'll hate me. Or maybe you'll see a part of yourself in my words. Either way, I need to speak. Because silence is what led me here in the first place. Before we begin, I need to warn you. This story contains mature themes. It deals with the challenges of trauma, isolation, and moral boundaries that should never be crossed. If these topics make you uncomfortable, now is the time to stop listening. But if you stay, I promise you, this story will make you feel. It will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, about family, about the fragility of human nature. And maybe, by the end of it, you'll understand why I can never look at myself the same way again. To understand how this happened, you have to understand who I was before. Who I was made to be. I married young. Too young. When you grow up in a house where love is something you chase instead of something you're given, you stop asking if it's right. You just hold on to whatever you can get. Frederick was older than me. Wiser, or at least, that's what I told myself. He had a way of making me feel small and lucky at the same time, like I had won a prize I didn't deserve. I mistook his control for strength. His jealousy for devotion. And by the time I realized what he truly was, it was too late. He broke me down, piece by piece. First, with words. Then, with silence. Then, with his hands. I remember the first time he hit me. It wasn't a slap. It wasn't a shove. It was something worse. It was a hand wrapped around my throat, squeezing, just enough to remind me I had no power. Just enough to make me understand, he could take my breath if he wanted to. And in that moment, I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I just accepted it. Because deep down, I thought, maybe I deserved it. The worst part of being with someone like Frederick wasn't the pain. It was the isolation. The way he cut me off from everything and everyone until he was the only thing I had left. He wanted me alone. Dependent. Afraid. And for a long time, I was. But then, there was Ismail. My son was the only good thing in my life. The only thing that felt real. I remember holding him for the first time, his tiny hands gripping onto my fingers like he already knew, I was all he had too. Frederick didn't want a child. He barely acknowledged Ismail. He was never there for the late-night cries, the first steps, the whispered, I love yous before bedtime. That was all me. And in some ways, I think I clung to him too much. I needed him to need me. Because when you spend your life being controlled, you start to believe that love and dependence are the same thing. We were inseparable. He was my shadow, my safe place. When Frederick's temper got the best of him, Ismail would run to me, wrap his little arms around me, whisper that he'd protect me one day. That when he got bigger, I wouldn't have to be afraid anymore. It broke my heart. Because even at 6 years old, he understood. He saw the bruises. He heard the screaming through the walls. And he knew, his father was not a man to admire. He was a man to survive. And so, we survived together. We built our own world inside that house. Late-night stories under the covers. Secret hand squeezes to say, I love you, when we couldn't say it out loud. Laughter in whispers, because laughing too loud might set Frederick off. He was my protector, long before he ever should have been. And I was his. But children don't stay children forever. And somewhere along the way, something changed. I don't know exactly when it started. Maybe it was always there, buried beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to unravel. But I do remember when I noticed it. It was the summer after Ismail left for college. He had been gone for months, and the house felt empty. Too quiet. Too big for just me. And then, one day, he came back. He walked through that door, and for the first time, I saw him differently. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man. 6 feet 2 inches strong. Broad-shouldered. The kind of presence that fills a room without even trying. And when I hugged him, I felt something I wasn't prepared for. Warmth. Not the warmth of a child coming home. Not the comfort of a mother holding her son. It was something else. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Just a mother noticing how much her son had grown. But then, I started noticing everything. The way his voice had deepened. The way his arms wrapped around me with a quiet strength that made me feel safe in a way I hadn't felt in years. The way he looked at me, not like a boy looking at his mother, but like a man seeing a woman for the first time. And God help me. I liked it. I should have stopped it there. I should have buried those thoughts so deep they never had a chance to see the light of day. But I didn't. I let them sit. I let them grow. Because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me like I was wanted. And when you've spent a lifetime being invisible, you don't turn away from that kind of attention. Even when you should. It's strange how a single moment can change everything. How one look, one touch, can twist something familiar into something unrecognizable. The first time I noticed it, I told myself I was imagining things. That I was tired. That I was reading too much into nothing. But once a thought like that enters your mind, it's impossible to unthink it. Ismail came home from college that night, looking like the weight of the world had finally crushed him. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes hollowed by something I couldn't name. He barely made it through the door before he collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. I sat beside him, placed a hand on his back, felt his muscles tense under my touch. "Talk to me," I whispered. He shook his head. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "I don't know what's wrong with me, Mom. I feel broken." I pulled him into my arms, felt his body tremble as he buried his face against my shoulder. His arms wrapped around me like they did when he was a boy, but this time, his grip was desperate, not like a child clinging to a mother, but like a man unraveling. I stroked his hair, whispering, "You're not broken, baby. You're just lost." I held him until he fell asleep. We stayed like that for hours, curled into each other on the couch. And at some point, as I lay awake, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, I felt something shift inside me. Something I couldn't explain. Something I didn't want to name. After that night, things were different. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way that anyone else would have noticed. But I felt it. In the way I looked at him. In the way he looked at me. It started small. I'd catch myself watching him longer than I should. The way his hands moved when he talked, the way his jaw clenched when he was lost in thought. The way his shirt clung to his back when he came home from the gym, sweat glistening on his skin. And then there were the touches. Casual. Innocent. Except, they didn't feel that way anymore. A hand on my waist, lingering just a second too long. His fingers brushing against mine when he passed me the remote. The way he'd pull me close when he hugged me, his hands pressing into my back with a quiet intensity that made my breath hitch. I told myself I was imagining it. That it was nothing. But nothing shouldn't have made my stomach twist the way it did. Nothing shouldn't have made my skin flush beneath his gaze. One afternoon, I was out in the yard when my neighbor, Georgia, leaned over the fence and smiled. Your son is so handsome, Everly. I bet he gets all the girls. I laughed. Brushed it off. But later, as I stood in the kitchen, washing dishes, her words came back to me. I should have felt pride. I should have felt motherly admiration. But what I felt was jealousy. I didn't want to think about him with other women. I didn't want to imagine their hands on him, their lips against his skin. And the moment I realized that, I felt sick. Because what kind of mother thinks something like that? I tried to stop it. I really did. I forced myself to act normal, to push the thoughts away. But the harder I tried to bury them, the stronger they became. And the worst part? I wasn't the only one who noticed. Ismail started looking at me differently too. His eyes lingered on me in a way they never had before. There was curiosity in them. A hesitation. Like he was waiting for something. And then, one night, he said something that changed everything. Mom, do you ever think about things you shouldn't? My stomach dropped. My throat went dry. And in that moment, I had a choice. I could have laughed. Brushed it off. Told him no, of course not. That some thoughts are meant to die the second they're born. But I didn't. I looked at him. And instead of saying no, I said nothing at all. There are moments in life that split time in two, before and after. You don't realize it while it's happening. You don't see the shift until you're standing on the other side, looking back at everything that led you there, wondering how you never saw it coming. This was that moment for me. It was late. The kind of late that makes the world feel smaller, quieter, like you exist in a space where reality feels softer, less defined. Ismail and I were on the couch, watching a movie. I don't even remember what it was anymore, just that the room was dark, the only light flickering from the screen, and the air between us felt different. He was sitting close. Closer than usual. And maybe it was the stillness of the night, or the way exhaustion makes you say things you wouldn't say in the daylight, but before I could stop myself, I asked him. Don't you want to do this with your friends? He glanced at me, confused. Do what? I gestured at the screen. This. Hang out. Watch movies. Be young. He didn't answer right away. Then, with a small shrug, he said, I'm not comfortable around them. There was something in the way he said it. Something heavy. Something lonely. And instead of letting it go, I pushed. How will you ever get a girlfriend? He smirked, the kind of smirk that made my stomach tighten before I could remind myself that it shouldn't. I don't need one, he said casually. I'm already banging with 2 women. I should have laughed. Should have made some motherly remark about how he should be careful, about how he was too young to be reckless. But the only thing I felt was a heat rising in my chest. A sharp, unexpected wave of something I didn't want to name. Jealousy. Before I could find my voice, he pulled out his phone, scrolling for a second before turning the screen toward me. A picture. Him, leaning in, kissing a woman. Her hands in his hair, his fingers gripping her waist. Another one, his lips against her neck, her head tilted back in pleasure. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't disgust that made my stomach twist. It wasn't motherly concern. It was something much darker. Much more dangerous. I looked at him, and he was watching me. Not like a son looking for approval, but like a man gauging a woman's reaction. And I knew, in that instant, he felt it too. I handed him back the phone, forcing a laugh. Forced the words, good for you. He smirked again. And then, as if sensing something in my voice, his expression softened. You okay? I nodded. Lied. Said I was just tired. And maybe I was. Tired of fighting this thing that was growing between us. Tired of pretending I didn't feel what I felt. Tired of being alone. That night, after he had gone to bed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't afford to have. I thought about those pictures. About the way he touched those women. About the way he looked at them. And for the first time, I let myself wonder. Did he ever look at me that way? I turned over, pressing my face into the pillow, ashamed. But shame wasn't enough to silence the thoughts. It wasn't enough to stop the longing that had been growing inside me for longer than I wanted to admit. Because the truth was, I hadn't felt wanted in years. And Ismail? He was the only person in my life who ever made me feel seen. I should have run from that feeling. I should have buried it so deep it never saw the light of day. But I didn't. I let it stay. And in doing so, I sealed my fate. Guilt is a strange thing. You'd think it would stop you, make you turn around before it's too late. But sometimes, it does the opposite. It traps you. It convinces you that you've already gone too far, that there's no turning back. And that's the most dangerous lie of all. Weeks passed, and I felt like I was drowning. Every time I looked at Ismail, I felt it, this war inside me, this battle between what I knew was right and what I wanted to feel. I told myself it was nothing, but nothing shouldn't make it this hard to breathe. I tried to be normal. To act like nothing had changed. But the tension between us was a living thing, growing stronger every day. And then, one night, everything cracked. He came home late, looking restless, unsettled. I was in the kitchen, pretending to read, but I felt his eyes on me before he even spoke. "Mom. I need to tell you something." I looked up. His hands were in his pockets, his shoulders tense. For a moment, he looked like the little boy I used to comfort, the one who used to crawl into my lap after a bad dream. But he wasn't a boy anymore. And this wasn't a nightmare we could wake up from. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice light. Too light. He hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "I think something's wrong with me." My heart clenched. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration tightening his jaw. "I can't stop. I can't stop banging. I don't even know if I want it half the time, I just feel like I need it. And I don't know why." I should have given him the right answer. I should have told him to talk to someone, to work through whatever was making him feel this way. But instead, I did what I always did. I comforted him. I reached out, took his hand. "There's nothing wrong with you." He let out a breath, shaking his head. "I don't know. It's not just the banging. It's the feeling afterward. Like I'm still hungry for something I can't name." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Banging can be rough. Banging can be hungry. That doesn't make you broken. He looked at me then, really looked at me. And I realized my mistake the moment it happened. Because something in his expression changed. And so did mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what had just happened. I told myself it wasn't real. That nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew better. The next night, it got worse. I went to his room, like I had so many nights before, like I had when he was little and afraid of the dark. But this time, when I pushed open the door, he was sitting on the edge of his bed, his hands clasped between his knees. "Don't," he said quietly, not looking up. I frowned. "Don't what?" He sighed. "I don't think you should be here." I swallowed, forcing a laugh. "Since when?" He rubbed his face, looking exhausted. "I just want to sleep without clothes. I don't want to make things weird." I stepped inside anyway. "It's not weird, sweetheart. Your girlfriends can see you like this, but I can't. I've always been here." He finally met my eyes. And what he said next shattered something inside me. "It is weird. I just never said anything. But I see you, Mom. I see everything. I should have left. I should have turned around and walked away. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered the words that changed everything. Why fight it? The second the words left my mouth, I wanted to pull them back. To pretend they were never spoken. But it was too late. Because some things, once said, can never be unheard. There are moments in life you can never take back. Moments that rewrite everything you thought you knew about yourself. And once the line is crossed, there's no going back. No undoing. No pretending it didn't happen. I used to think guilt was the worst thing a person could feel. But I was wrong. The worst thing is knowing you should feel guilty and realizing that you don't. Not at first. Not in the beginning. Because at first, it didn't feel real. It felt like a dream. A nightmare I would wake up from only to find that nothing had changed. But I didn't wake up. And every moment after that became easier. Less shame. More hunger. Like the part of me that should have screamed, that should have stopped this, had gone silent. But nothing stays buried forever. And guilt, it always finds a way back in. At first, I told myself this was different. That it wasn't like him. That I wasn't like him. But then I started seeing his face in the back of my mind. Each time he touches me, I see my husband. Frederick. The way he used to look at me, not with love, but with possession. With control. With something that made me feel like I belonged to him, like I had no choice. And suddenly, I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the one trapped. I was the one holding the power. And I hated myself for it. Because wasn't this how it started with him? With justifications? With convincing yourself that you're doing nothing wrong, even when every part of you knows that you are? I had spent my whole life being controlled, and now, in some twisted way, I had become the thing I feared most. Had I always been broken? Or did this break me? I didn't know which answer was worse. It wasn't just me that changed. It was him too. At first, he was hesitant. Unsure. But then, something shifted. He started looking at me differently, not like a mother, but like something else. Like something he owned. The warmth in his eyes turned to something sharper. The way he spoke to me changed. He stopped asking. He started expecting. Demanding. And I realized, he wasn't my son anymore. He was becoming someone I didn't recognize. He would get jealous. Possessive. If I pulled away, if I tried to set distance between us, he would find ways to pull me back in. And for the first time, I felt afraid of him. Not because he was violent. Not because he hurt me. But because I had created this. Because I had let this happen. And now, I didn't know how to stop it. I avoided mirrors. I avoided my own reflection, because every time I looked at myself, I saw someone I didn't know. I saw the girl who had once been full of hope, who had believed in love, who had wanted a life better than the one she was given. And then I saw what she had become. I had spent years blaming Frederick for the person I became, for the things I suffered. But now, there was no one else to blame but me. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And the worst part? I had no idea where to go from here. Some mistakes can be undone. Some can be forgiven. But there are some sins so deep, so unforgivable, that even God turns away. I used to think that love was simple. That love meant protection, safety, sacrifice. But I know now that love, in the wrong hands, can be something else entirely. It can be selfish. It can be hungry. It can destroy. And that's exactly what I did. I destroyed him. I was supposed to be his mother. His safe place. The one person in the world who would never hurt him. But instead, I became the very thing I swore I'd protect him from. The thing that took away his innocence, his trust, his sense of right and wrong. I failed him. And in doing so, I failed myself. I sit alone now. In a house that no longer feels like home. In a body that no longer feels like mine. In my hands, I hold a photograph, one I've looked at 1,000 times but can barely stand to see now. It's Ismail. No older than 6, grinning up at me with the kind of blind trust only children have. The kind of trust that says, "You will never hurt me." I stare at that picture for what feels like hours, my fingers tracing the edges, my breath shallow and unsteady. And all I can think is, he never stood a chance, did he? Not with a mother like me. I wonder sometimes if evil is something we're born with, or something we become. I wonder if love, when twisted enough, can ruin even the purest of bonds. And I wonder if, in the end, some people are simply beyond redemption. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect understanding. But if you've listened this far, I only ask you this. What do you think? Are we shaped by the things that happen to us? Or are some mistakes so great that they define us forever? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. Let's confront the things we don't like to say out loud. And if this story made you feel something, if it made you question, reflect, or even just pause, then make sure to like this video and subscribe. Because these are the stories that need to be told. The ones that force us to face the uncomfortable, to learn, to grow. And maybe, to stop history from repeating itself.